Okay, everyone, welcome to the Montefiore Synagogue. This synagogue was part of Sir Moses' vision for Ramsgate and for his purchase of the lodge at Eastcliff. He wrote in 1830 already, as it's quoted, he says, "If please God I should be the purchaser of the Eastcliff Lodge, it is my intention to go, but seldom to London, and after 2 or 3 years to reside entirely at Ramsgate. I would build a small but handsome synagogue and engage a good and clever man as a reader." And that really set out his vision to ultimately construct this synagogue, which just 2 years later, in 1833, was ultimately opened. And there are descriptions of the way it was constructed. As we mentioned, it had been shortly after his return from Israel. And it's quoted here the following, that it says, Mr. Montefiore covered the part on which the wall near the Holy Ark for the reception of the sacred scrolls of the Pentateuch was to be built with terra santa, which they had brought with them from Jerusalem. And so in the very foundations, beneath the Hechal, they placed earth that they had brought with them on their recent trip to Israel. By the way, some of the things I've been quoting from come from a book that was published in 1933. So on the 100th anniversary, there was a book published called Think and Thank, which is the motto of Sir Moses Montefiore. It's written by one person, Reverend Cardoza, and also by a fellow by the name of Paul Goodman. Paul Goodman was the secretary of the congregation, the grandfather of Professor Martin Goodman from Oxford University, who still joins us every year on Yom Kippur. And so that set out the beginning of this life here, this religious life that he would establish. Now, just taking a look at the synagogue itself, the construction of it is interesting. People refer to it sometimes as Regency architecture, but it actually seems to be linked a bit also with Montefiore's family heritage. So people have asked, who were the Montefiores? When did they come to England, and so on? So the Montefiores, as their name sounds, came from Italy. Now, Sir Moses was actually born in Livorno. If you go to Livorno today, you can see a building with a plaque on it that says, on this location, Moses Montefiore was born. I don't know if it's the exact location or if it just means the town. But his family was already living in England. They were just there on holiday when he was born. His grandfather had already arrived in London earlier in the 1700s. So they were an English Jewish family by the time Sir Moses was born. At that point, he wasn't called Sir. He would just call him Moses. But the family maintained those connections, and we know that when Sir Moses would travel to Israel, they would often stop in Livorno, which was of course, an important port and had a very large Portuguese Jewish community there. And so the influence of Italy, I think, can be felt a bit within the architecture here. He comments sometime later on in his life when he was in the Sephardi synagogue in Pisa, which you can actually still visit, that he said, if he would have seen that first, he probably would have made it even look more like that particular synagogue in Pisa. But he loved this synagogue, and it played a role throughout his life. He would be in Israel again a few years later on the anniversary of the construction of the opening of the synagogue, and it was celebrated there in one of the synagogues in Jerusalem. I mean, this became a great passion of his. He sat just over there in that seat, and that was his little desk that he used, and so that was actually where he sat. His wife, Lady Judith, sat in the gallery in the far side over there, so perhaps each at the opposite corners they could gaze upon one another, perhaps. And this very much was their synagogue. Somewhere in this book they comment that this synagogue, had no wardens, had no board of trustees. He describes it here. He goes, Sir Moses was both the Parnas Presidente and the Gabbai of this synagogue. He wasn't the rabbi. They hired minister. They had a minister that was here, and it was like one family that kind of were the ministers for decades. Father, brother, son, that were here for many years. Who also acted as his shochet when he traveled. So this really was his synagogue. There were no dues to attend here. Everybody was welcome to come. This was his. This was his synagogue. And so it's unique, really, kind of in synagogues in general, to have a place that is that's quite like this. And so the architect that he had for it was a Jewish man. It was a fellow by the name of David Makata. David Makata's father was Moses Makata, whose sister was the mother of Sir Moses. So Sir Moses' mother was a Makata, Bruso Makata, and her brother was Moses, and their son was David. He was an architect. He studied under Sohn, actually, and would eventually come to oversee the Sohn Trust in later years, and so was a recognized architect. He did a lot of work with railway stations and things like that, but he built this synagogue. Interestingly, the way the story goes, a few years later, David and his father Moses were part of the group that left and founded West London, and Sir Moses was quite upset by that whole ordeal. He had other relatives that were part of the breakaway, and he seems to have never really forgiven them. In his role on the Board of Deputies, he wouldn't allow representatives of West London to sit on the Board of Deputies, and that didn't change until really for 50 years, until he stepped aside from being the president of the Board of Deputies. But this David Makata went on to build other synagogues. I think he built one of the West London synagogues that would have been built. He didn't build the current one, but he helped oversee it a bit. He built, I think, a synagogue in Brighton, potentially. So he was kind of involved with synagogue construction, but this was the first one he did, and it's only the first synagogue to be built by a Jew in this country. And so that's kind of a significant element within the synagogue and its style. But as I mentioned, this was his home, and he was here all the time. And he would, because he lived on the, just nearby estate, which was obviously a grand home, he regularly had visitors and guests, and it became a destination. It was a place that people would come, and so there were people who would come and attend the synagogue, and they had minyan, and it was a fully functioning synagogue. They built a home eventually on the site where the ministers would live. There were, if you look on the map that is on the sheet, you can see references to a cottage and a mill house, which were some other buildings that had been here that were part of the estate. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah.
I have two questions. First one is there any symmetry with Bevis Marks Synagogue in terms of the architecture artifacts? Because I don't see much resemblance, but...
Yeah, I think, definitely one of the things you find typically with Spanish and Portuguese synagogues is they are always built in the style of the times when they are constructed, right? So he wasn't going to come here and build a synagogue that looked like, Bevis Marks from 1700 when he's building it in 1835. So this is kind of built more in what would have been stylistically attractive during that era. But of course, the core layout is the same, right? With the teba set more towards the back, right? Obviously, the seats are facing towards the middle. Obviously, these few are facing forward, but the rest of them are facing towards the middle. You can see there's no curtain on the outside of the hechal, it's on the inside. And we know that regardless of who the minister was, the minhag was always the same as Bevis Marks. So this was, you would have come here and this would have been the same. In fact, David Nunez Vaz, who many of you know, his father was a minister at Bevis Marks, kind of up through the Second World War. And he said that the community would actually kind of perhaps in one of these buildings that I was showing before, basically there was a flat there that if any of the ministers ever wanted to kind of go on holiday, they could stay in one of the local flats, and kind of then come here for services and things like that. So this was kind of a place that people in the community would holiday. They would come to Ramsgate, and it was kind of by the seashore, and you could come, and you then come to Synagogue, and it was part of kind of it was part of the culture of the Spanish and Portuguese community, that this was kind of one of their places that they would go to, even though it wasn't theirs. It was but it was part of the life of the community, and the minhag here would have been what we know from Bevis Marks.
So we know what year he actually bought the land and how long to build the actual building, because it looks like quite complicated down in alleyways.
Yeah, I think the land was bought right around the same time, so 1831, something like that, 1832, and it seems like a year or two later this was up. So can builders build that fast? Yeah. None of those.
Sorry.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that he was a Parnas Presidente, he was the Gabbai. But was this synagogue still under the rules of the Spanish and Portuguese Beddin at the time, a community,
Yeah,
chief rabbi, there's a Chacham?
Yeah, it's very interesting. So basically in the regulations of it is that it has to follow the minhag of Bevis Marks. It says unless there's like a particular kind of like local consideration that something should be slightly different, but that it would have to be though with their agreement. So yeah, the expectation was in terms of like, shall we say, the religious practice. It was, even though it was his synagogue, his rule was that it had to. And again, in light of what we know in terms of what was going on with other parts within the community, I think for him that was really important, probably to make that very clear. Yeah.
You said 1831. Was that when it was opened?
I think it's 1833 that it's opened.
No, because I'm looking at the royal family. It says sovereign king.
Yes, so there's a story behind that. So there originally was a different prayer for the royal family that would have been for that's right, at that time. Eventually, the board that was here, when this was kind of replaced, went to, of all places, to Bristol. So there's a college there called Clifton College that had one of the first places that had like a Jew's house there. It went there. When that closed, it then went to the Bristol congregation, where I actually visited last year for other reasons, and they have it on the wall. And they didn't know why they have it, but that's why. It comes from here. It comes from here. Yeah, there was a bit of work that was done here, I think in like the early 1900s, sometime in the 1900s, where some of the elements that you see today were added, and like some of the marbling or something like that.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, yeah.
Was it candlelit?
So yeah, it was originally candlelit as well. It was also originally candlelit. Yeah, yeah.
Do we know who made these stained glass windows? Or?
We do. I think those are later additions. I forget offhand. There was work that was done in the early 1900s, kind of, or maybe even in 1933 on the 100th anniversary, and it seems that there was maybe one of these descendants, not descendants, but one of these relatives did a few kind of additions to the building. Any other questions? Yeah.
Did he remain president of the board of deputies after he came to live in Ramsgate?
Yes. Yes.
So he would have had to go backwards and forwards.
Yeah. And he went back and forth. Yes. Yeah.
You know what the dedication say? Should do.
Yeah. So these are the memorial prayers. These are the
That's
memorial
a
prayers.
Shekhaya.
Yeah. These are the memorial prayers, the Hashkabot. Yeah. Which we'll say a little later when we go to visit.
Okay, that's